Today, we are going to tackle a fear that we high achievers rarely admit. What if all this goodness goes away? You know, we work so hard to build success, but down deep, there's always that nagging thought. What if I become irrelevant? Like they say on Talladega Nights, you're either first or you're last, right? And we operate under those conditions. In this episode, I'll break down why high achievers struggle with fear of irrelevance and how it directly leads to burnout, how the shift from chasing relevance to building long-term legacy is in your cards. Welcome back to The Inside Man. Today, we are going to tackle a fear that we high achievers rarely admit. What if all this goodness goes away? You know, we work so hard to build success, but down deep, there's always that nagging thought. What if I lose it all? You know, what if I become irrelevant? And what if the world moves on without me? Yowza! Oh my gosh, being left behind, you know, like they say on Talladega Nights, you're either first or you're last, right? And we high achievers operate under those conditions. And so, man, I'm sorry, I just got a little sidebar. That Jesus prayer at the table in Talladega Nights was insanely funny. Anyway, but in this, let's get back to the episode and why we're here. In this episode, I'll break down why high achievers struggle with fear of irrelevance and how it directly leads to burnout and how the shift from chasing relevance to building long-term legacy is in your cards. So let's get into it. Why do high achievers fear become irrelevant? Well, first of all, and this is big, and this is in the context of the outside man, we tie our identity to our success, right? So the idea of like falling behind, losing it all, it's like we die, right? Because it is us. And so, you know, right now, the other thing that's going on is the world moving so freaking fast. And if we stop, we feel like we're going to be left behind. I know I was like, nobody can outwork me, outrun me, outthink me, out, right? Because back down behind me, I feel like I have the big lion chasing me in slow motion, like gonna come. And it just keeps that urgency, that immediacy, that no peace mindset. And what happens? It leads to 3 destructive habits. One is overworking to prove that we still matter. So it's like, we don't know how much to work. So we give blood, right? We don't give sweat, we give blood. And we just overwork because back behind us, we think we're being chased by the wild, ferocious animal, right? So it leads to overworking, and we can never shut it off because if you shut it off, like you might die. You're going to be left behind. Then here's another thing, clinging to old successes instead of evolving. You know, it's so easy to go, okay, I was successful here, holding on to it. And I see a lot of businesses and people becoming irrelevant because they're holding on to that old win. I had a guy, won the lacrosse championship and it was huge, right? He was like such a good athlete. And like he lived, with that championship, as his and I get it. I mean, to win a national championship is a big deal, but it's like, how do you evolve? Now, this guy also evolves, but you can see there's this, we get stuck in these old successes. And then instead of evolving, instead of looking forward, I always say, that when you're driving in a car, I'm going to take my wife to Vegas this weekend. Can't wait. My new car to Vegas, cannot wait. And we're going to be driving and we're going to be looking at a windshield and the big sky because it's a convertible. And the windshield is way larger than the rear view mirror. We should look at them in perspective, right? We spend time looking in the rear view mirror sometimes, and we got to be careful of that. Next, hanging on too long without exiting. This is a big deal. Now, I always think you should create your business to sell it from day one. That was one of the mistakes I made, and that's one of the advisory elements that I bring to businesses, because the thinking that goes to exit is very different than when it's a lifestyle business. I use my business as a lifestyle business versus how do I scale it and build it? And what I learned through this was if you build it to exit, your lifestyle and your money doesn't involve you. So it pulls that identity out pretty fast and early, not at the end of the rope. But here's what happens. Because our identity, I talk to so many entrepreneurs and they're not wanting to sell. And the reason why they're not wanting to sell is because their identity is attached to the business. And it's like, they always say to me, Gary, then what would I do if I didn't do this? Let me tell you something. There's so many things that open up, but the fear of creating that space to reinvent yourself is scary as hell. Scary as hell. So those three things: overworking to prove you still matter, and you're not knowing enough. So just keep going until you're, bleeding. And then clinging to old successes without evolving. And the last one is hanging on too long. When your business is mature or the industry's ripe for selling and you hold on too long and miss that beautiful window, that is the exit. So here's the key question that I want to challenge you with on on the episode today. Are you building something that lasts, or are you just trying to stay in the game, right? Are you looking at long-term relevancy, systems, processes, or are you just grinding it out, staying in the game because your identity is attached directly to your business and you're sitting there just trying to, stay alive and survive? Well, this podcast is not for the surviving. It's to take you and meet you where you are, because we're all in survival. It's just natural. And then how do you move through the spaces to get to a place of thriving and peace and joy and abundance and all those elements that happen when you let go and move out of the middle of your business, detach from the identity, become the inside man of who you truly are. But that's all clouded right now by the busyness, the workaholism, the relevancy, and trying to hold it all together, putting the mask and armor on, right? So I want to share my personal experience about this because I think sharing personal stories are really valuable. And thank you for your comments. This has been well beyond my wildest dreams. Speaking about relevancy, exited my company, 8 figures, and now I started this movement for men to have a place to go that's safe. And 2 things: you could be safe and get out what needs to get out, and you win simultaneously. Both things, safety and winning simultaneously. And the key to that is really understanding that guys have gone through it before you. You're not just the first one, even though we think we are, because it's largely because we men don't share. Women share, and they're very much in the game of knowing that they're not alone. We tend to rub dirt in it, not share. And you hear me say that over and over here on the podcast, right? Excuse me. So there's 2 very different moments where I questioned if I was relevant. One was when I was in the day-to-day, in the grind, I call it. It's where you're called to be. You wake up, your calendar's packed, you're back to back. And when you're not, it's you fill time, right? So it's I built the business, had success, but then the industry changed. Oh shit. You're cruising along. How many times did this happen for those of you that have been in business more than maybe a decade, where you're just cruising along and then 9/11 happens, or the Great Recession, or the pandemic, right? In my case, those all happened and we maneuver through them beautifully. But the key here is there was 2 things that happened industry-wide and really societally. One was the next generation of thinkers came through, where I was dealing predominantly with baby boomers, and they masked everything. And baby boomers, basically, they lived to work and they were committed to the owner. It was almost like legal slavery, because the mindset of the worker was if you're paying a person, they're indebted to you. And that was a generation that came from the generation before them. It was a little looser than the Depression generation, but it became if you had a job, you were fortunate, right? And that was pounded into the boomers' minds. And basically, they became, the slaves to that. And I use that lightly, please. I want to honor, the past history of America, and also, the indebtedness I'm going to talk about, right? Working, living to work, not working to live. And then all of a sudden, this generation came in and said, no mas. And it's not going to be like that. And the leverage we had on the people that worked in the businesses that I served were no longer leveraged. I remember interviewing people, and their resume was like they worked 5 minutes in 5 days in 5 months at places, and they go, "Isn't my resume awesome?" I'm like, "No, it sucks," right? But it was like this movement, and I started seeing it, and it wasn't going to change because boomers were going out, millennials were coming in, and we had to reinvent our approach to the millennial. And here's how I did it. It's funny as shit. One of my most coveted things is owning a millennial card. What I did for 3 years was go into the valence and understand what it was like to be, because I was right on the cusp. I was right in the middle of boomer and millennials, right? And so, but I worked since I was 5 years old, nights, weekends, 24/7, 365, just the obsessed workaholic. And so I adopted the boomer mindset of living to work rather than working to live. And so I had to learn this whole new thing called working to live. And really, it set me up for this podcast too. The beginnings of breaking down the old model of like how we worked, how much we worked, those types of things, right? And so what was really cool was becoming a millennial. Like I became curious. You're going to hear that word curious. Curious is a key attribute. Getting in the world of it, instead of being self-righteous, which is an outside man game, inside men are curious. They're like wonderment. The outside man is self-righteous. The inside man doesn't know shit. And it's like, getting to, and I'm not offering this right now, but if you stay on the podcast and you continue to listen, I always say, people ask me how I'm doing. I go, I am doing awesome. My feet are firmly planted in midair. My feet are firmly planted in midair. And there's this Greek truth. I have a friend, Begonia, who is like a great advisor to me for the podcast from a woman's standpoint. And there's a lot of women advising their men to get on this podcast. And she gives me the female standpoint so I can bring it into the podcast. And I said, "Is that Greek mythology?" So she said, "No, it's Greek truth. Everything is Greek truth." So she's a Greek. It's awesome. But she's a very wise woman. Also, my wife does too. Those are the two ladies that have really adopted the principles of this podcast and really want to be a stand for men to be inside men, because they know how important it is for relationships and families and workplaces. And so it's really cool. She said there's a Greek word that means meteor. And she goes, "Gary, your feet firmly planted in midair is like a Greek truth it's a Greek word called meteor, where you're actually flying through the world and like you experience the world different." Now that's very scary. It would have been very scary for me. I couldn't hear it. I just want to start introducing concepts and principles to you, because where suffering comes from is the identity that we assume. And that's feet firmly planted in the identity. So when I say feet firmly planted in midair, like that's scary for some to not know who you are, right? And that's actually good news. And I want to start moving toward that conversation as we deepen these podcasts. I earn your trust as you stay with me, because if you listen so far, you're starting to get that there's something else out there beyond the traditional grinded out, the traditional mindset shifts. This is manhood. This is manhood 4.0, and getting to be the man that you want to be, the man who your kids and your wife and your workplace want you to be. And it's a different ground, a different ground to be. So getting back to tying this all together, like not knowing and being curious about millennials brought me to an understanding of like, oh, they value purpose. They just don't want to sell widgets, where like boomers they're just okay taking their pay, selling widgets. That didn't have to be a purpose behind their work. There didn't have to be a why. So we always had vision, purpose, and values, but now that was how we attracted killer talent, because in our ads, it was like, do you want to work at a place that stands for transforming people's lives? Hell yeah. Like all of a sudden they're reading that versus the old kind of ad, which was like, hey, 9 to 5, busy office, this kind of computer, all that kind of stuff. So, and we built systems for millennials. So, and then, I wanted to become relevant in terms of being in front of a stage. I had owners that were largely the old school thinkers, and I had workers that were the new school thinkers. So I had to bridge emerging generations, and we had to retool. My book, my original book is in its eighth printing, $1 Million Dentistry. I started in dentistry, and and now it's still like, it's sort of like Stairway to Heaven or Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band or Meatloaf or whatever think has like its longevity. It's a classic, right? There's some classics, but how you wrap the classic and there's some nuances need to be shifted, right? So that curiosity is a great tool. And then what happened was we rebuilt our approach. We rebuilt many other things. In fact, one of the things that really we got to see was the relevancy. And I'm sharing these examples with you so that you can like start looking in your world, right? To get you to think. This is to prompt you to think. And the second thing that really made me push even farther was that consolidation was happening in our industry. So our market was shrinking because they were going into groups and they no longer needed advisory. So we figured out a way to actually roll up our own practices and consolidate our top practices. And that was like a 10x in revenue for us. And not only that, we created consulting programs that served this market of people that was completely not served. So the curiosity of looking like there was people that were wanting to sell their business, but they didn't package it. Like I'll give you for instance, like they were still operating on their collections, and that happened before consolidation because that was sold to individuals. Now the new buyers were going on EBITDA, and so they had to repackage their practice. So we created a consulting program that was called 90-Day Package Your Practice for Sale. Boom, right where the market met the market where it was, and now this business after my exit is going to go on for the next 10, 20 years, barring any new advancements. But now it's set up for success over the long haul. And that's how I want you to really think about relevancy. It's like, are you really setting yourself up right? So I want to give you the 3 elements of this podcast. The one thinking process that I want to give you is how to stay valuable without chasing relevancy. I would get out of relevancy because that's really about your identity. And I would get into how am I going to create more value? Focus on that. Focus on the impact, not attention. So like, instead of trying to stay popular, like I was, I wasn't a popular kid in high school. I went out to dinner with guys that I went to high school with, and they were like, yes, you were. I'm like, no, not in this, inside me. The voice in my head was not that, right? It's funny how people perceive that. But it's trying to stay popular is about your ego, feeding your ego. And that's the outside man. If you, work on becoming an inside man, root yourself in your purpose. See, my purpose is to create freedom and value for everybody I come in contact with. And so if I come from that place versus like, hey, I need somebody to like me, do you see how I can create these strategies? Because I'm not trying to feed the ego. I'm feeding what the client wants, what the market wants. And that's really what business does. But quite frankly, so often we're feeding the ego throughout the day. And that is what we want to disconnect from. And so root yourself in purpose and in service, being of service to people and making a real difference. That's how you stay relevant rather than how many likes you're getting, how, all the external validation things, right? The outside man stuff. The second thing is reinvent yourself and don't cling to the past. Now, you're going to hear a lot in my book, Life on All Cylinders, and you can download that. You can get it on Amazon. I talk about being right out of the box. We're self-righteous, and that gets us in trouble. We want to be right. And for a while, that works being an entrepreneur. But then after a while, it becomes the burden or the barrier to succeed, right? So really giving up the right to be right and getting in the world of relevancy of where things are going. The most successful people adapt, don't just maintain. We're looking to adapt forward, right? So the millennial shift, the emerging generations that I talked about, working to live instead of living to work, working to live, which is the millennials instead of living to work. We created a dream program So one of the things, we didn't have to do this when there was millennials, boomers, because they would just come to work and go to work and then go home. Millennials, they don't want to sell widgets. So we had to sell purpose driven, that we had to set the context for the business to be purpose driven. And really things they weren't working for status. Like if you notice, millennials, they don't wear horses with polo guys on them, or the whole idea of like status selling. I said to my son, "You can have any car. What do you want?" He goes, "Oh, Subaru, man." Like, they don't, they have a better sense of who they are, and they don't have to justify it. It's like where China is right now, because China didn't have middle class. And all of a sudden China's, they're all about the status and wearing stuff, sort of where we were in the 80s and 90s, but that's not so anymore. So you had to find the leverage points. And one of the leverage points is, millennials want experiences. They don't want things. So we created work as an experience. We have a dream program where people fulfill in their dreams. We have games that we play. We put incentives in and put games in, and we reiterate our purpose in the morning huddles every day. That changed everything, because now all the millennials, where there was a big problem attracting good talent, they were going to the practices that had all these things in place. And I'm telling you, it was a game changer in terms of recruiting talent, in terms of getting the most out of the team. All those things shifted. But if I was focused in on likes and how many people, friends I have, and how many, all the social media external stuff, none of that would have happened. And so I share that with you humbly, because I got caught in that. Spiral, and that gets us into trouble when we cling to the past and have our past successes. And then with regard to industry consolidation, we found a way to leverage the revenue, and we went to it's getting out of your own world with this thinking about relevancy, and getting into the world of your team, getting into the world of your clients, doing surveys, just calling them up, and just having I remember Jeff and Jana. I called them up and they go, here's what I'm thinking. They go do it. Because I know 25 other guys in our community of people that will do it. And I was like, okay, it's time. And so, really doing some research, being curious, getting into the world of other people, that's what has you be relevant. Now, I want to talk about other ways to really look at building a legacy over likes, I call it. And it's really like relevance fades. Like there was a time where, the demand for me to speak was like ridiculous, right? And then people hear you and they're like, he's still good, but like I listen to him. And then like you got to kind of work to reinvent and things like that. So relevance fades, impact lasts. Looking good on the outside versus creating massive value in tune with where your team is, your internal customer, and where your clients are, is where the marketing goes, where your strategy goes, like that. So becoming a visionary. So how do you become a visionary? Not everybody's a visionary. There's 4 types of personalities in business owners. And you go on Myers-Briggs and figure this out. There's the competitive. That's the guy who doesn't care about details, wants to just get the outcome and kill it, and looks at the finish line and really, like me, leaves dead bodies behind. A humanist cares deeply about people. They want to know the impact on people. A methodical wants to know the details. And a spontaneous is like squirrel, 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 and, attention deficit. And so one of the key things about being a visionary is understanding where you are in one of those 4 places, right? Because understanding where you are as a competitive, you'll know your strengths and where you have to, areas of development. So like for a competitive, you're not bogged down in the details. So you want to like really go forward. So it's easier for a competitive and a spontaneous to look forward than it is a methodical and a humanist, because a humanist they're validated by thank yous, by getting validated by other people. A methodical thinker likes to know the steps and really isn't focused in on outcomes, but not making mistakes and perfectionism. So, we'll break these down as we go, but it's really important to understand like your personality type. It might be a little bit more difficult if you're predominantly a methodical, predominantly a humanist, and a little bit easier to look forward and anticipate. Gender-wise, I want to set up for visionaries. Women are notoriously, inherently built for seeing the future before men can. Women can see the white picket fence and the type of house they want, how many kids they want, where they're going to go to school, the type of husband. It's no coincidence that you ended up there because they have a picture of all that. So tapping into women is really valuable to do. As guys, I didn't understand that. Like, we like present time. That's why we like boobs. They're right there. They're just like, we like present time things, right? And I hope you got a laugh out of that because that's like what came to me. So I went with it. I hope I didn't offend anybody. But like, a woman will talk about the future more often. So that's really important if you're looking to build yourself a visionary and you don't have that strength. The other thing I want to help you where to look at the landscape. When we were looking at consolidation, you might have something going on in your own industry, but we like to look at other industries in the landscape. I remember speaking to my sister-in-law. She represented photographers for models and, celebrities and things like that. And Getty was the big one at the time, and they were swallowing up all the small ones like hers. And so I really got to see that other industries were all in consolidation with the progress of private equity firms, et cetera. We looked at medical, we looked at vet, we looked at other industries. So that's a really good place to pay attention to. Dig into other industries, see what's going on there. Usually, you'll see industries following suit because where money goes is where attention flows. So that's where you want to be looking. The next thing is reach out to what I call upstream professionals. Upstream professionals are like CPAs, attorneys, bankers. They see things earlier on. They are mobilizing with private equity firms. That's a good place to look. Really finding the most innovative CPAs, attorneys, bankers. Last one I want to give you is trade magazines and blogs. So I find that we had a residency at the top magazine in our industry, and a magazine and bloggers, they get people inquiring into topics they want to talk about. So that gives you a nice temperature gauge of what your industry is wanting. So every year we got real stats, real facts on what dentists in this case wanted. And so we were a year ahead because trade and blogs, they tend to be like having their editorial calendars a year ahead. So they're always looking ahead. So that's a really good one that I found over the years to really value and work on relevancy through there. Listen, the key takeaway here is you don't need to be relevant. You need to be valuable. Stop chasing relevance and start building something that outlives you. That's how you want to be thinking about this. That's why I like the idea as an entrepreneur. Build your business to sell it from day one. It's a very different mindset, and it does all the things you need to do. Like, instead of like waiting till the end and then trying to transform everything, it's powerful. The next thing I want you to do is go to GaryKady.com, download the 10 things guys suck at and what to do about it. And this is where we help high performers shift from short-term success and worrying about losing it all to long-term legacy. And I want to close with this. This is Gary Kady reminding you relevance is temporary, but impact is forever. And I'll see you in the next episode. Look, if you're not there, I'm not here. So thanks for being here.